move past the initial query stage. Okay, so you get my query and you say, oh my God, this is the most wonderful query I've ever read. I must reach out to this author immediately. How would you reach out to me to talk about the book, and what would the next step be from there?
Yeah, so if I like the query, then I request the manuscript, and I also usually request the synopsis right away, too. I just love synopsis. It just helps me kind of, when I start to see an issue maybe in the manuscript, if I can refer to that and see maybe what you're doing and what's not translating, that can be helpful. And then, I start reading. And if all goes well, I finish it and I love it. And then the next step would be, I will email you and say, I love your manuscript. I would love to hop on the phone. When can we do that? And then we kind of go from there.
So if I send you my manuscript, I'm sure this is subjective depending on what you've got going on with all of your other client load. But how long can I expect to hear back from you?
That is a great question. It can be anywhere from like 2 days to I try to respond to everyone within 4 months. So it kind of varies. And a lot of times I know authors can overthink being like, oh, she signed that person after reading, the manuscript in a night, and she's had mine for 2 months, she must not like it as much. And that's not really the case. A lot of it has to deal with what, life and work and where I'm at. Sometimes things just hit my manuscript, my inbox at the right time, and I can just download it and read it that night. And then sometimes, I have client work and it can take a little bit longer, even though I'm just as excited to read it. But I do try to get back to everyone within 4 months. I would say average time is two months would be my average.
Gotcha. So, okay, so you read my manuscript, and what if it's pretty good, but not quite great, but you can see potential in it? What happens then?
It kind of depends. It depends what the concept is. If I'm just so in love with the concept, I'm like, you know what, we can make this work. If there's a question in my mind, if I can make it work, I do sometimes offer a revise and resubmit, and I will highlight in an email where I could see corrections, and then see what you come back with, and then I can kind of go from there.
Gotcha.
But I do take on most projects. I never take on a project thinking there's going to be no edits. No project is perfect. So it kind of just depends how many edits, and if I feel like I have the fix for where I'm seeing the problem. Sometimes you'll see a problem, you're like, what can we do? What can we do? And then sometimes it's so clear. And that's kind of how I know when I'm the right person for it, if I feel like I have the what is needed to make it a stronger story or convey the author's vision. And that's more confirmed, though, when we hop on the phone or chat further.
Okay, so if we have our conversation and you say, hey, I'm thinking maybe we make some of these changes, and I say, heresy, madam, this is the most perfect manuscript. The divine voice of God told me this manuscript. We can change not a word, but that's probably going to be a short conversation.
Depending on where I see the issues, but probably, yeah, that would be a hard, because even if I was okay with that, it's going to be a hard sell to a publisher that you've printed it as is.
Well, no writer smart enough to listen to this show would ever yell heresy on a phone conversation with me.
Yeah.
So when that phone call happens, what are you looking? How does a successful version of that call go?
I think there's a lot of stress that there's like this one way to do it, or you're trying to win me over. And really it's just a conversation to see what the author's goals are, where they see the manuscript. And I always, when I offer representation, go into fair detail about where I see edits and the scope of the edits. If I think it's a few rounds, if it might be something more intense, just to make sure our visions are aligned. And that's something the author would want to do. And I think just kind of get a feel of where they see their career going. I sometimes like to hear what the next project is, because as much as possible, I like to be a career agent. And so that sometimes helps me kind of see where they see themselves going and focusing. But there's really no right way to do the conversation. It's really just a conversation at that point, and really letting the author also get to know me. I'm on the spot just as much as they are, especially if I really love that manuscript. I could be already worried that, someone else might snag it. So it's definitely a two-way street when you hop on the phone.
Well, if I say, hey, I'm talking to another great agent that I heard on the Middle Grade Ninja podcast, and they don't want to make half the changes you do, does that does that change the conversation a little bit about changes you're willing to make, or do you stand firm and say, nope, this is what I see for the book, and if we're not there, then I'm not the right fit for you?
Definitely what another agent sees. I think you can approach books different ways. So I'm not so concerned what other agents want to do. But definitely it's more of a conversation of where the author sees it and how they're responding to those changes. And for me, when I give notes, a lot of times it's highlighting a problem, and the solutions I give are just suggestions or a way for an author to springboard from that. So it's not necessarily set in stone, or, it's my way or the highway. So it does, there's not one way, but I definitely, you would have a conversation and kind of see why, where I'm seeing issues in the manuscript and how we can maybe address them in other ways. But it's definitely a dialogue. Edits are a dialogue. Edits are a collaborative experience. And so I'm always open to that, even at the phone call level, or the offer level. We can start there.
Okay, so if you're making suggestions for revision, is that at the phone call level, or does that happen before we get there?
I will usually set up the phone call for the offer, and then we could discuss where I see edits needed. Yeah, I usually don't send them over in an email just because I think it's easier to walk through them for the reasons you're saying. What if, the author feels really strongly about something? I think it's easier to talk it out and be like, oh, I can see why you're saying that. I can see how it's not translating on the paper. Let's see what else we can do to maybe achieve that. So I think having a dialogue makes it a little bit easier than just an email.
Okay, that makes sense. And then you'll offer even before I've made the changes?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Unless we're doing a revise and resubmit, then in that case, the notes are coming through an email. It's not an offer. It's more of, let's see where we can get this manuscript, if we can get it to a place that I can offer. But if I've offered, you don't need to make the edits till you sign with me.
Okay. Gotcha. But if I get that notice from you that, hey, I would like you to make these revisions, if you do, please resubmit it, I should definitely take that serious because you're on the fence about making the offer, right?
Yeah, if you're interested in working with me, I hope, you do. I think what authors sometimes do is mistake that for a very fast turnaround. And usually, if it was an easy edit, I would have offered representation because I'm expecting to do some work. It's a much deeper edit. So I appreciate when authors approach it that way and take the time that's needed. I think they just worry that the offer is going to go off the table, and it never expires. Take the time you need to do the changes and do justice if they match with the vision that you have for your project, and really then send it to me, and then I can evaluate it further.
And then if you're asking me what other projects am I working on, do you want to hear that I've just sent you a middle grade and I have another middle grade? Or would you prefer that I could show you how flexible I am and I've got an adult rom-com that will fit both your needs? I could be the only client you ever need. I can write all of your requests.
That's a good question. And really, there's not a right answer. I think what I'm looking for is just, am I an agent that could do your career? Are you, just doing this one middle grade, but you really see yourself, as a finance business expert, and that's really where you see your career, and you're doing this one-off middle grade book? That can kind of just give me a better idea of where I might fit into your career. I don't do finance books. Maybe I can be just your middle grade agent, or maybe you really need someone who can kind of manage both, and maybe that's not me. So I think it's just more of a conversation of seeing how we fit together. So there's not a right answer. I'm not looking for anything, but more just kind of seeing where we're both at and how we could approach the relationship.